Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 12:15, a few minutes after our start time. Excuse me, we need to start the meeting. This is the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee meeting of the whole. I will be chairing today, co-chair Anna Brawley. Today is November 21st, Thursday. We are noticed from 12:10 to 1:10 p.m. My intent is to move pretty quickly through our standing reports and touch on a few specific items. So hopefully we will not need the hour today. So let's go ahead and start with introductions and then we'll move forward.
Daniel Voland.
Meg Zalatow.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Zach Johnson.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant.
And then on the phone, we have Mr. Salt.
Here.
Mr. Martinez
Yes, thank you.
and Mr. Myers.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And did I miss anybody else? Okay, not hearing any. And then we are joined by members of the administration who we'll be hearing from today, some folks in the audience, and Mr. Slivka from the Trust Fund Board. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, under our, I'm actually going to switch order so that we can let our standing reports folks go early as needed. So we're going to skip over the new business and move to our monthly updates. First, I want to see if we have our chair of the Budget Advisory Commission, Mr. Harvey, here or on the phone. Okay, not seeing him right now. We will make room if he shows up. And I realize we removed some of our standing reports, so I'm going to go ahead and ask our folks to come up. If you are typically here to give a standing report, we'll just move through those briefly and come back to our other topics. So we'll start with our MOA Trust Fund Board, Mr. Slivka.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. So the board met on November 5th. We welcomed Philippe Bryce, your new CFO, who is also a member of this board, and we're thrilled to have him. We approved our 2025 budget and forwarded it to the administration, and we rebalanced the portfolio so that we could pay the second half of the dividend of $8.15 million, which is going to show up by the end of November. And other than that, it's business as usual, and I will stop there, see if there are any questions.
Questions for Mrs. Slivka? And folks on the phone, please text me if you want to be in the queue. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so thank you for being here. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, our intent is to cancel the December 19th meeting of this committee. So this will be the last meeting of the year unless things get off the rails and we have to call a new one. And so thank you for being here, and we will see you next year. Next, why don't we go to our OMB director? So I will ask that we don't touch on the specific topics on the agenda. If you have any other general updates you want to give, and then I will also invite Mr. Cipriano up from our revenue department. Thanks. Yeah, I think just if you have other standing reports to give first, and then we can come back to that.
Through the chair to the assembly, I will be distributing some of our monthly reports to you via email shortly, the budget to actuals for the last month, and what we project our year end to look like, with some explanations of where some of the departments are running over and who is running under. There's some very interesting year end turns coming. One of them is the municipal manager department is running over specifically because of workers' comp, not because of spend on labor or non-labor. So that will be a conversation. But as far as follow-up on standing reports, I think that's about it.
Okay, any questions from Ms. Browse on that?
Is
Mr.
there,
Constant.
thank you. Is there a missing document spreadsheet where?
That's what I'm going to send.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And we'll look for that in email and then get that posted on the committee website as well. Mr. Cipriano, could I invite you up very briefly? So we do have one written or paper report in front of us, the revenue summary. And just very briefly, if, as we discussed before the meeting, just share any big highlights or anything that is a big variance from what we're expecting for revenue by the end of 24. Thanks.
I'm happy to do that. The report is in front of you right now with 6 weeks left to go. On page 1, you can see we're at 775 million in SAP against the total budget revenues of 835 million, which is right on schedule. Just a couple of very quick highlights. At the bottom of page 1, you'll see real property is in at 570 million. Second page, personal property, we have at 53.7 million right now. The biggest variable we're looking at this year is cash pool earnings. In the first part of the year, 4.16 was the estimate from Public Investment Department. Currently, they're looking at about 1.74. So they'll probably miss, their best guess is 2.97 million under. And then the only other revenue stream I would highlight to you is on page 3. Top of the page, we're looking at room tax. Currently, that 24.1 million figure is from SAP. At the end of September, we believe we're at about 31 million. So 45.5, our budget looks like a good number at this time of the year, which is always our hardest call of the year. Any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Constant and then Member Zalatow.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, the cash pool earnings were not there because we didn't take out our TANs this year, right? So that's the negative.
One of the reasons, right, because there's an arbitrage where we borrow at very low rates and we reinvest at the money market rates. That didn't happen this year. So that was one factor.
And so what effect does that negative have on the budget?
The 24 final numbers for cash pool earnings look to be under 2 million. 1.74 is our best guess right
No,
now.
I understand that. I guess
Okay.
maybe it's not your question. It's the question of what does that do to the net balance sheet for the year? So in terms, are we gonna have to cut something? Where are we at with that? What does it do?
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I believe based on the numbers that Mr. Cipriano is stating and what we know for the 24 year in total, there should not be any requirements for cutting.
All right, thank you. Or adjustments.
Not at this time.
Thank you.
Ms. Zalatow?
Thanks. We don't have to dive deep now, but maybe we can in December or January about the Building Safety Fund. It's great to see the strong return on it, that it's coming in over what we budgeted for 24, which is great. And maybe we can revisit that conversation about abatement at that time. Thank you.
That's all.
Through the chair to Member Zalatel, I think if, and this is for the whole committee, the BSSA conversation should be a part of what first quarter revisions, yeah? So that we
Yeah.
have that.
Because it'll be
No.
part of the tax levy conversation. So I'm hoping maybe we can see what's driving the higher revenues. Are we seeing more permit, like,
Yeah.
you know, what's all in that mix? Because it's a mix of funds.
Okay. we'll
And
plan.
then
Yeah.
how do we want to proceed with that as we talk about setting that forward? Because we did put some of it in the 25 budget because it's part of the cap.
Correct.
You know, do we want to adjust? Are we moving, you know, those kinds of questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
I will talk with our permit center and see if we can get some detail pulled together for January or February at the latest.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that would be helpful in advance of 1Q, because I think also, remember, we are working to educate our members and the public about all of the complex things in our budget. So that would be good timing. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. Ms. Cipriano, I know you just gave us the update for the room tax and said you think it's going to be on track for that budgeted number. Seeing the rental tax for the vehicles and the room tax next to each other, we've collected 92% or realized, to use the term, of the rental tax versus 53%, and they're both quarterly reported. Why are we so lagging on the room tax relative to the two kind of very similar tax structures?
That question probably should be directed to the controller's department. It's basically the same format. Quarterly, we get monthly reports on the room tax. And do we receive monthly on the motor vehicle, to your knowledge? Okay. Slightly different processing. We get a little more information between quarters on room tax.
Right. And so why then would we have a substantially lower number for the room tax if we even have more information relative to it than we do for the rental tax? This is a red flag for me, or at least a yellow flag. Like, I don't understand why we're at 53%. It's not demonstrated here. The point you made, and I trust you, is that we're on track to raise all that revenue. What's the gap? yeah, what's the gap? And so that's the one question. The second question I have, and it might not be you as well, then the SEMT category that's there. I know that this one is real tricky because we book the money in 1 year and we collect it whenever the state decides to give it to us. We haven't had a definitive response to what happened to that fund. We applied without having completely met our requirements to make the application. We hadn't had audited financial statements at the time, that very last day that it was due, but we did have financial statements that were generally close and accurate just before the auditing process. And so we submitted with information that was not quite complete, and we haven't yet had a report back whether or not the state accepted those documents, and we are anticipating payment, or we're still in a, we don't know if we're going to lose $18 million category. I don't know who's the right person to answer. Oh, no. Ms. Bruss.
Through the chair to member Constant. As far as I know, and I can get specific detail on this, but in conversations with Chief Schrage, that money is not in jeopardy of being lost at this point in time. We are waiting to get the actual funding in
Right.
hand, but it has gone through as expected. And if we need any more detail, I can invite the chief and any other subject matter experts to the meeting in January to
Yeah,
discuss.
and I'm fine with that. Just hearing that is more information than we've had, was we submitted an unaudited financial statement and that didn't meet the requirement. And so a tough auditor or tough financial person could reject that, but that would be bad. So then do we know, are we triangulating in on the anticipated payment date, right? Because as I think it was Alden had suggested the last time I heard him talk about this, it could actually come in next year, right? And we're getting close to the end of the year, and that would scramble our books a little bit. And so do we have any kind of sense of if we're going to see that happen in 2024?
Through the chair to member Constant, I have a meeting with AFD on Monday, and so we'll be able to figure out a little bit more information then. I'll also talk to the controller's office to see how they may book it if and when it comes in. If it is funding that is booked in one fiscal year but is received in the other, they do have the opportunity to put it back into the revenue stream. So I don't know when we will exactly receive it, but if it is before the end of this year, then we're great. and we
Easy,
can-
yeah.
Yep.
If not, then it's a little trickier. Okay, I certainly would appreciate some kind of a report once we get a sense of where we land in that before the end of the year, so that I don't have to, without good information, bat back arguments that we overspent our budget by $18 million and, all the bad news that could come from that.
Through the chair to member Constant, I'm happy to include any information I find when I send the other documentation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you for being here, Mr. Cipriano. Okay, so let's roll back to, let's take care of the ARPA discussion, and including the actions that were on our budget on Tuesday, and then we'll roll back up to the other items. So go ahead, Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. So the current status of ARPA grant funding within the municipality has a couple of different phases. The first is that as part of the budget process on Tuesday, the funding that was returned from UAA and the Workforce Development Program and the interest that had accrued on the prepaid funding in the ARPA tranches, I guess, were appropriated to the tune of about $2.3 million. So there was $890,000 as part of the surplus UAA return and $1.4 million in interest that had accrued over time from those funds being in our bank account. So that was a great thing to find, that interest was there and available. There are still a handful of very small dollar amounts that will need to be reappropriated in order to be directed for spend before the end of the year. Currently, OMB intends to bring that document for you in December I think, at the second meeting so that it can be part of the process. But it should be less than $50,000 total, because some of them are $6 or some of them are small typos that were just originally booked in error. So that's where the dollar amount stands right now. We have 5 requests from grantees for date extensions on their grant agreements. That doesn't mean beyond the ARPA timeframe. It's beyond their original grant agreements, some of which were 1 year, some of which end this year, and they want to spend into 25. So those extensions are being worked through with our contractor and the mayor's office. And all the rest of our municipal spend that's identified in that spreadsheet that we have looked at frequently is still set to be spent by the original departments that they were appropriated under. The health department has the building fund in order to make some improvements to their space. Parks and Rec has the Wi-Fi project and a couple other projects that were funded there that they're finishing up right now. So as far as we can tell, the funding that was appropriated within the municipal departments will be spent within the ARPA timeline and be complete and done by the 26th deadline.
Questions from members? Ms. Branca?
Can you remind me what happened with the UAA? I think it was ARPA funds that they returned. I think it was workforce development.
Yes.
Where did those end up?
That was part of the dollar amount that was reappropriated in the budget on Tuesday. So that 890, I think it's 890 and 600 or some around there. That dollar amount and then the 1.4 in interest was the total absorbed into the budget.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, it's kind of on the previous question. Karen had a point to raise, and you might have the answer to this already.
So I was just looking at the municipal assistance and it's saying 1,025%. And I was wondering what that is about.
That is about the fact that, I'm trying to find which
Page
is on
4.
Municipal assistance. Yeah, there it is. So what that's about is that this is there's 2 things happening here. I can't guarantee which one of the 2 things without talking to the controller's office, but they are both in the same vein. Part of this is that because of the ACFR timing, our audit and payment schedule with the state is delayed. So this payment may be the actual cash from 23 as opposed to 24, or the 24 allocation, as far as the report that we have received from DCCED, was more than the actual budget amount that we had projected in first quarter.
So, yeah, there's so many questions about that now. There are so many questions. So thank you for bringing it up, Karen.
Ms. Alto?
Thanks. I think that 406 number might be an error. So remember at first quarter budget revisions, they suggested reducing the state assistance down to a low number. We said no because they were going to pull the AWU dividend and we said no. So I think we need to go back and see what was actually passed in the first quarter budget revisions, because I think we said, yeah, we're going to get the 4 million. We were optimistic from the state.
Through the chair to members Alatel, so that would mean that the dollar amount shouldn't have been decreased to that
Correct.
minimal level, right?
Yeah,
We can
and
look
so
at
we
that.
would just mainly look like we were on track instead of 1,000% better.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
What I
and
thought.
I'll add to that as well. I remember that was one of the changes that we made in the, whether it was S version or omnibus, whatever we did, because the budget referenced information from January, and we had a pretty good idea by late April that that was going to be funded, at least through 25. Mr. Constant?
So it was actually budgeted at 4 million then? Okay, thanks. That's not the answer I wanted.
It's not the answer I gave either, so.
Thank you. I believe your answer. It's just not the one I wanted.
Well, and I guess just to add one other point to in the legislative program, we continue to make getting community assistance a priority that affects us and other local governments. And the action the legislature took was not to fully capitalize the fund. And so yet again, we're in the situation where it's uncertain for this year, but we will continue to advocate. So just to put a point on that. Any other questions on ARPA? Okay, great. Well, it sounds like we are on track to fully appropriate as is required and encumber the funding for ARPA. So that's great. So let's roll back to new business and I will turn it over to Ms. Browse, but I will preface this by saying, for those of us who joined last year, we're still getting into what a quote unquote normal budget process looks like. And so talking with Ms. Browse, I thought it'd be useful for us to understand kind of what happens after we approve the budget, and of course, pending any vetoes that we might see coming forward, but kind of what happens between now and the end of the year into the beginning of the year, and then also what actions need to be taken or will be taken at the end of this year with rollover funds of ongoing projects or other needs. So just these are really educational opportunities, but time for questions. So I'll turn it to Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. I'd like to start by saying thank you to everybody here and on the phone and all Assembly members who participated in the budget process. I know that you did via the dais and the voting, obviously, but the conversations and the collaboration through the build process and understanding where your community and constituent interest was coming from was really helpful. From an OMB perspective, our office is always thinking about, how and where we can fit priorities into our budget, and knowing what those items are from you and your constituents is really helpful so that we can help get to the right answer in the long run. So I'm very happy to have gone through that process, and I look forward to next year. Our post-budget activity consists of taking the amended documentation from the Tuesday night meeting. We incorporate any and all changes that were made, and because of the conforming amendment language that the Assembly approved, we are able to make small adjustments within our documents that help carry those numbers across in order to make it all accurate. I believe at this time that OMB prepared all that adjusted documentation yesterday and returned it to Mr. Farina for a sort of review of making sure that those are the items that were passed and that math works out. There are a couple of conforming language changes that you'll see when the adjusted documentation comes back to you. Those are some titling changes. The budget document had the previous name title of the Office of Equity and Justice. The reorg has the name, the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And so those documents pending reorg approval will match those titles. Some of the language changes that were approved as part of action on Tuesday will also be in there. And once it's approved via the clerk, then we will send official documentation of those changes back to the Assembly for notification. And the biggest action in OMB post-budget is the budget load. So that is where we take all of that information and go back into our two budget modules, which are SAP and Questica, and input all of the detail from the 25 budget that is different than the 24 budget and the continuation totals. And one of the tricky things about the process is that because SAP is structured in a way where you can only have one org active at a time, the 25 budget is currently loaded in SAP, but it does not match the organization that will live in 25 because we have to wait until the very end of the year to load the new org into the way the budget is built. So as of right now, it's loaded. We are ready to go when the reorg is complete. And then once we hit the time frame that we can post that organization in SAP, we'll do that. And the 25 budget will be active.
Any questions?
So
Mr. Constant?
thank you. In discussions, I guess that's the next item, the rollover. I can wait. The only other thing is I thought that the next step in the budget process was popping champagne, but not all that work. Thank you.
Got to take a nap first.
Nap is allowed.
Thanks. Other questions from members? Okay, I have one quick clarifying question. You mentioned that report of the minor changes and adjustments you made. Is that, I think you used the word inform, so is that just an information report that we accept, or is it something that we have to approve?
To be frank, I don't know.
Well, actually, in the conforming amendment, it didn't say that they had to communicate anything to us. And so, yeah, and so what they have to do is have the concurrence of the clerk or designee. And so in some times we do ask for an AIM, but the problem with that is the budget documents are, 1,000 pages plus. And so submitting that by AIM would just hand you another binder this thick. And so there's no expectation of any further communication other than the budget be accurate to what we passed according to the clerk and the budget office.
And to the chair, I believe in the past, because there is no specific requirement when the conforming amendment is passed, that the assembly documentation has been sent back, not in book form, but in the short format to the assembly as a public notification that these are how the changes were made. So I believe we'll be happy to do that this time if that is
That would be an AIM then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
and so, but it is not a requirement. We could have added that language. It was very specifically not in there.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And just to be clear, I think we certainly don't want to create 1,000 pages of paperwork. And so if there is a way to share that briefly, again, just for education members, but also just to know that is not a requirement. So-
And actually, that's the other thing that happens as part of the OMB process is that we do go back through and make all of the adjustments within the full books and reprint approved budget books. So there are 3 budget books, I believe, that are created throughout a year's process. It's the proposed budget, the approved budget, and the revised budget. And so we have gone through the proposed, we are at the approved, the books will become approved, the approved budgets will be posted online. So that will be public notification of those changes, but we'll also send those assembly documents back for awareness. So that will be part of it.
I might,
Mr. Constable.
yeah, I think that the minimum requirement would be the clerk communicates to the assembly, we have accepted their changes in an email. That's literally all that would be required by what we amended. And so anything beyond that is great.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? Not seeing any, and I don't see any on the phone, so let's move over to the dealing with the end of FY24.
So as part of our year-end 24 process, and I think members are familiar with this to some degree, there are some carry forward funds that need to be approved in order to make sure that we don't cut off grantees or projects that are specifically in motion and have not had time to close out their funding for the year. There are a handful of projects that I know have been identified by the administration and from the assembly over time that we have kept track of. I was speaking with Marilyn earlier today about that list to make sure that we have everything. You should see the document come forward to you at the second meeting in December for approval. And I'm happy to circulate the document in advance if there are items that you'd like to make sure that are included, or I can just confirm that they are included. If there are things that you're concerned about, please let me know and we can make sure that they're addressed.
Thanks. I'll just briefly note, and then I'll move back to Mr. Constant and Ms. Salatel. 2 that I think I've communicated already. One is the Clutina after-school funding. We have emailed about that. They anticipate using their funding, but there was such a late start. The other is the funding with the assembly for the site access project that we're doing jointly with the administration. And I know we've communicated about those. That's just 2 of them. And then I'll.
Yeah, so I thank you. Some of that's already done, and we have communicated to OMB the resolution that made those changes. There's one more that is on the assembly side that I'm told we can't run until he gets something back from you. And so I'm hoping we can nail that down before the end of the year. And that's just that strategic planning money for the Parks Department. And so that's, I think, on the assembly side, the last thing that we're aware of. There might be some final action towards the end of December coming forward. And so whatever magic needs to happen, please let's make that happen so we can get on the December 3rd agenda, that final item. Thank you.
Ms. Salatel?
Yeah, are we anticipating it's over $500,000, so it's going for public hearing? Yeah,
It should.
so it'll be introduced on the 3rd, and then heard on the 17th?
Not at this time.
Well, that's our last meeting of the year, and I'm really loath to want to participate in a meeting after our final meeting of the year.
So we'll coordinate calendars and there is the sorry to keep jumping in, but the tactical question would be then, I hate to even think about it, can that be done in January?
Through the chair to Member Zalatel and Mr. Constant, not at this time, but we haven't prepared it yet. We can get it on the addendum. I just don't know. We have to work it
Right, and so I think that,
for the 3rd,
yeah, so that the 17th is available.
correct?
Okay, there you go. That's a good answer.
And I will go further to say that I imagine there's also an opportunity, if necessary, to lay it on the table because it is for introduction.
Correct.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and I'm not seeing any from folks on the phone.
I'll say
Oh,
one
Mr.
last
Constant.
thing. I think Ms. Zalatil just expressed a very important sentiment to communicate to the body and the administration that as we round out towards the end of December, the desire is to minimize the number of meetings to as close to 0 as possible. And so extra special emergency meetings could happen, but they are not preferred. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and to that point, our last meeting of the year is two days after our last regular meeting of the year. So that was the intent with there. So I'll just see, is there any other items you would like to share at this time, Ms. Brous?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, well, that is the end of our agenda. I'll just note legislative program and budget items. Of course, we just approved the budget, so that was our priority. Oh, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. It's not here because Mr. Harvey wasn't here, but I think at this point, if there's general consensus, I would really like to ask the Budget Advisory Commission to weigh in on the sales tax proposal. I've kind of hinted a couple of times, so I want to, Mr. Cloud is here, so maybe we can all kind of round around, and ask if they could weigh in. I think that's a very appropriate thing for them to let us know what they think.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Brous.
Through the chair to Member Zalatel, I know that the Budget Advisory Commission had a presentation from AEDC, I think 2 months ago, and so they are prepared with information, and we can make sure that they know that request has been made. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that good reminder. And just to note as well, so that item AO 2024-105, the sales tax proposal comes back to the Assembly on December 3rd, but there are multiple work sessions on December 6th, and so I imagine that item will get postponed to the 17th, which would be after their ability to meet. So hopefully they can meet that timeline. And actually that reminded me of one more quick item request. And I know that this is not an OMB specific thing, but I will continue to ask for it in public since I had to miss a committee meeting yesterday. I would like to see a summary accounting of what was spent last year on emergency cold weather shelter. And I'm asking as an individual, but it seems like the Budget and Finance Commission or committee would be a great place to share that because we still have not seen that in a way that is summary for the entire season. It would be helpful.
To the chair, I believe that is being worked on, and if it was not part of a presentation yesterday, can be provided shortly.
Thank you. And I will go back and watch that committee as well. Okay, any other items?
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm
Constant.
just going to end where we started. I'm extraordinarily grateful to the chairs of this committee, to the OMB director, to the process that occurred that was such a refreshing breath of fresh air over the last several years. Just an expression of my gratitude for how the process worked.
Okay, anyone in the audience for audience participation? Yeah, I saw some deer in the headlights look, so no. So I think if there is no other business, then we can adjourn and early happy end of the year to everybody. Thank you.